don't think I know most of you, so hi, I'm Perry. Try a little further away, okay. I'm the CTO of Glitter, which is a seed stage company building in Bitcoin. I'm going to talk today briefly about the protocol and then how I see there being future applications in maybe novel ecash schemes. The idea that we're working on is trying to build smart contract functionality into Bitcoin, which is a big thing that a lot of people are working on and has challenges that we're all aware of, block space and block time relative to Ethereum. Obviously, the UTXO model makes things more difficult, the need to have these predeterministic outcomes, and then the absence of contract custody. There's a lot of things that exist in the ecosystem that are getting into full sort of DeFi type smart contract functionality. And obviously there's a lot of BIPs out that would help get us more what we need. And then maybe my protocol's irrelevant, who knows? But the biggest thing I'm going to focus on today is that piece about contract custody. So I want to just give a high level piece on the inspiration from ETH to bring that into the Bitcoin ecosystem. Obviously, ETH uses an account model as opposed to a UTXO model. Which allows for the maintenance of global state to be actually such that contracts are called on-chain and those things are mined, but then the actual outcome is just assumed to exist. It's not actually committed to on-chain. This leaves contract accounts in a space where they have custody of funds, but they don't actually have keys. So you have this intermediate custody model where it's not you controlling it, not really someone else controlling it, it's not really anyone controlling it, it just exists by consensus. And this lets you have the absence of this predetermined outcome, right? When you think about how we do something with a DLC or with a taproot tree, you have to predetermine every possible outcome that could be everywhere it could go. But when you have a contract that is able to move money, even if it's not truly custodial, it leaves the ability to have inputs and then outputs figured out down the road. This is kind of the main point, and one of the major things that I am trying to build into the protocol, the Glitter protocol, is to have basically a Bitcoin analogous protocol, but to implement this piece about contract accounts that can have this sort of it just exists type of custody by consensus. I'm going to give you the vast speed run on my protocol because that's not the major point here. Glitter protocol lives in Opreturn. It's UTXO based. It does not use a VM and then has a secondary consensus network. I'll stop for like 2 seconds if you want to read, but the idea basically is that it gives you a UTXO driven Opreturn protocol. You could think sort of the way that Runes works, but builds for the existence of a contract type account so that you can have this, what I'm calling here, uncustody, that allows for non-deterministic outcomes. Okay, I can come back to the slide later if I have my next question. But basically this is the idea, is that you have the ability to have the contract account, which actually does facilitate a lot of things in a DeFi system because you, for example, might want like an AMM pool and you don't want to have like, I'm putting in this and you're putting in that, and then we have to sign a DLC both ways to just sort of put in an input and get back an output and not require several rounds of signatures. At a high level overview, I have a comparison between how you would do things like in DLC or Taproot or with the VM-based system, like a lot of the L2s or other things that are out there, versus my protocol, which is not public yet, but we'll get out there one day soon. You have, with a DLC and Taproot, potentially the best custody properties because everything is an escrow and it's very verifiable. With a lot of the VM-based systems, you have custody that goes into a multi-sig, which basically means you completely are relinquishing custody. And then in a Glitter system, you're going to have this custody by consensus where there is no private key that can sign for things at all. It just exists because the network agrees that it does. You have then the trust that is conferred onto that, as opposed to trust that is conferred either onto the multi-sig signers or, in the case of like a DLC, onto an oracle, which can create all sorts of problems too. The functionality, not Turing complete, and that's necessary to keep it efficient and within Opreturn, but much more so than we have within actual Bitcoin script. So an attempt to sort of balance things there. But the important part for today is where could we take this with ecash, and I will give as a full disclaimer that when I designed this protocol, ecash was not the first thing I had in mind, but I actually, as I've dug into it a lot in preparing for this conference, think that there's a really interesting possibility to have novel schemes that could leverage this additional piece of the protocol. So this is my very high level, 0% implemented thought on how you would go about this. Basically to have a mint style contract that you would deposit to directly, then the contract has custody in a custody by consensus manner like you would have, right, again, in the ETH ecosystem. Vouchers are still going to be signed by some party that's predetermined, specified in the contract that there is an expected public key. But the difference being that once they are signed, if this party goes offline or is adversarial, it doesn't matter, because retrieving these funds is then going to be, again, in the contract custody by consensus world. So the network is able to verify that you did the deposit correctly, that the vouchers have been issued, and then when you want to redeem them later, you can, again, have the secret that is now shared and the serial number, and we are all able to verify that this is a unique serial number that was at some point signed by the expected public key. But if that public key is like offline and no longer signing anything, that's fine, because there's no bank system that needs to be able to re-recognize that those tokens are coming back to them and to be able to then release funds. Whereas in like a Lightning-based system, right, you have to basically completely trust your mint or your federation or whatever. At a high level, this is the comparison that I would give of how these things would work. There's definitely trade-offs in every direction. The benefit, I think, the greatest one that comes with potentially building ecash systems on the Glitter protocol is in terms of fault tolerance, both robustness and Byzantine, because once these vouchers are first signed, there is no need for that signer to be online or to be honest. And actually, as a user, there's ability to verify honesty before the vouchers are issued, because those signatures are pre-computed and then committed to in the same transaction of the issuance of the vouchers. So it's not like a PSBT situation where you just hope that they're going to be honest. If you go to get the voucher commitment message from whoever is the designated public key for that contract, and they give you back something that is wrong, you just don't ever push that transaction to the mempool, and you can go to a different contract that has a public key that is doing the right thing. You as a user can verify that before you decide to actually push that Bitcoin transaction. In the Lightning systems, obviously, I think we have a lot of on-ramp. You have to have Lightning channels open with your mints or your federations. They have to be able to communicate with each other, or you have to have like channels with both of them. In this system, because everything is run through contracts, when you receive potentially a voucher, you can redeem it with that contract directly. You don't have to have ever deposited to that contract. The public key signer for that contract doesn't have to be online anymore. You can just go and get funds back, or you can pay them into a new contract mint contract if you want, for example, a different denomination or something to that effect. So there's this sort of arbitrary interoperability. Redeeming, not great here. We're talking about Bitcoin transactions. This is slow and expensive. Totally acknowledge that. This is a major drawback. I have thoughts on how that could be improved, and I am eager to talk about that if people have thoughts or questions. And the other issue I see, obviously, is block time creates a race condition for a double spend. So once a block is mined, we can be very clear on which things have and haven't been spent. But it is possible that you could have a double spend attempt within the same block, in which case, I don't know, the protocol has to decide whether it wants to go first in, first out. Neither is valid. The entire thing is burned. That's a question for a later date, and I also have thoughts on how this could be improved, which I'll talk about in a minute. The benefit, though, here is that as is inherent in the design of the protocol. For a lot of things, it's supposed to be very fast to, very cheap and very fast to validate. So glitter-based transactions are always constant time verifiable, and for the most part are stateless. And when they are not stateless, there's not a need to maintain state more than like the most recent block. So the memory is very efficient as well. Wow, I've been talking a million miles a minute. Okay. Like I said, this is a very high-level spec on how I think that this could be done, and I would be really interested to see other people's thoughts on this and potential improvements to it. I have a lot of ideas about where you could go from here. Obviously, I think there's this holy grail with ecash in terms of having something that is transferable. The complexity there is not so much like in compute, it's just in storage. We have many academic systems that have been proposed that provide for proper transferability. It's just like, where are you going to put that data? Obviously, my protocol is op return based, so that's a pretty heavy constraint. But I think that there's a lot of potential there, and certainly if there were a viable way to do a smaller proof, then this would, I think, resolve the other issue with this, which is the fact that transactions have to go on chain. Certainly, if you really only had a peg out on chain and could transact the same vouchers, you know, person to person many, many times, I think it would mitigate that. You think about it like an ATM fee, sort of, at that point. I think there's also room for efficiency gains, potentially with a Lightning integration or integration with a roll-up, batching transactions. Those are both entirely possible. It just requires more things to agree to work together in terms of running more code on more servers. The system I have designed now uses a Merkle root. You could potentially do a time-space trade-off with a Bloom filter. I don't know if that's necessarily a good choice, but it's a thing worth exploring. Obviously, speed gains would help address double spend concerns in terms of block time if block time is faster. And there's all sorts of reputational systems that exist as well in a number of the other ecash schemes that have been proposed. I also think that there's a potential to do something like a ZeroCoin or Zcash type proposal to not have any signer whatsoever. But again, this comes back to the constraint with the size of zero knowledge proofs. I'm going to leave it here. Okay.